Hello and welcome to another edition of the Transfer News Central podcast. I'm Johnny Bentley, your host, and this week I'm joined by one of the most underrated sports commentators around. I only say that, Adam, because the general public seem to only know Martin Tyler from FIFA, and I think it's quite by name, so I think it's quite a shame. But Adam Summerton's with me, so good afternoon, Adam. You're probably hearing this either evening or morning, but good afternoon. How are you doing
Good
in these
afternoon.
unprecedented times?
Yeah, pretty good. Enjoying some extra time with my kids, which is a great bonus of it all. But I love my job, like a lot of people fortunate enough to do what I do. So yeah, I'm missing that like anybody else, really. Missing the football, playing lots of football in the garden with the kids,
Mm.
and just trying to fill the void. Really, I've even been watching back old football Italia videos on YouTube and stuff like that to try and
Yeah.
get some sort of fix. But yeah, I mean, there's more important things right now, isn't there? But I can't lie, I am missing it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen on Twitter Clive Tilsley commentating on his wife's cooking. Ian Dark, who was on not too long ago, the podcast is currently up now, so do listen to that. That's a tick on the old plug box. He's been commentating on himself in the garden, scoring goals. You
Yeah,
know,
it was a
as you
good
said,
goal as well.
it was a fantastic goal.
Yeah,
You can teach an old dog new tricks because that was right in the top corner, wasn't it? So I
yeah,
ask
brilliant.
you, have you indulged in any bizarre activities yourself?
I did. I'm lucky enough to have a country park behind my house, and I've
Mm.
been walking in there most days. And I did one day commentate on the formation of the swans and the ducks on on the lake. And yeah, I even commentated on my little girl playing crazy golf in the back
Oh,
garden.
fair
So
play,
yeah, it
fair
has got
play.
a little bit weird at times, but
Yeah, yeah.
other than that, I've kind of not really been doing anything in terms of work mode, really.
Well, I hope you haven't been drinking any bleach because,
No, I've
that's
avoided
certainly
that.
been. You do not drink bleach. Anyone who was thinking about it, certain people seem to think you can, but that's not for me to comment.
I
Anyway,
did. I did clean my windows the other day with Ajax, and it did bring it back to me that a year ago, almost to the day, I was commentating on Ajax in the Champions League.
I
And it
did
kind of
notice
summed
that.
up. It kind of summed up the way the things have changed, really.
Yeah. Massive, massive. I can't imagine how things. I mean, it's amazing actually. Someone mentioned that last month. It might be 2 months ago now because I can't remember when I read the tweet. No, it wasn't. It was last month. Eric Dyer ran into the stand to confront a
Yeah,
fan, and that was like major news. And now all of a sudden, I mean, it seems like 10 years ago, that doesn't it?
it does.
Absolutely
Yeah, it
mad.
does. Yeah,
Absolutely mad. But I think we'll move on to the National League actually at the moment because I was reading an article recently that National League's cancelled the rest of the season as clubs voted overwhelmingly in favour of that for the probably the benefit of each of themselves. And you've gained quite a big following on BT Sport for being a lead commentator of the National League. And before we get on to what it was like to do that, because I used to do a little bit of commentating on in non-league clubs. I thought it was very different to what we imagine football to be at the top end. I'm a Burnley fan. Very even as being a Burnley fan, the vast difference. But we'll talk about that after. Right now, on that decision, do you think that was essentially the only decision that they could have made to at least have some hope of avoiding going bust?
well, I think that's you've hit the nail on the head. I think as to the primary reason, perhaps as to why the decision is made. I think there were clearly big financial concerns there. And look, someone like me, who's whilst I do commentate on the league, I'm not financially involved in any of the clubs. And I think, I guess, someone like me is, you know, as frustrating as it is to be, what I think it was some clubs had 8 games, some clubs had 9 games left. To go through that whole season and have a 46-game regular season and for it to be abandoned at that point, I think for everybody concerned, it's hugely frustrating. And I, can only say as a broadcaster who's covered the league all season, it's really frustrating, and I feel that for everyone. But I think as a fan of the league, I have to respect the fact that the clubs, who clearly is their futures, there's jobs, livelihoods at risk here, and they've come to the conclusion unanimously that they feel that that is the best option. And I think that I have to, as everybody else does, has to respect that, really. But it's, there's still decisions to be made in terms of promotion and relegation and whether the season is null and void. But I think you're right to highlight the financial concerns. I think they were at the forefront of the decision that's had to be made, really.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when we break it down, we look at missing out on gate receipts, food and drink sales, merchandise. And I think I'm right in saying that at the moment they can have members of staff and players on furlough, but if the season did come back, they'd technically be working. So you can't use that furlough scheme as well, can you, in that case?
Yeah, well, it's very complicated in terms of contract issues, as we're going to see with all leagues across the world. I think some leagues will find workarounds because if you take for example Premier League clubs, there I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine that their contracts run slightly longer because the regular season for the National League actually finishes quite a little bit before the Premier League or the Championship season does. So I think you probably find that most contracts at that level would have expired at the end of April. I think I'm right in saying because the season finishes at the end of April. So I think there would be workarounds for clubs that got into the playoffs every season because they would go into the first 2 weeks of May. But if you're talking about a situation where a season, let's say for example, the National League had restarted and it restarted in, for argument's sake, June, how that would have worked in terms of contracts. And of course, the big thing here as well is that, as I understand it, the clubs would have continued having to pay the players up until that point. And again, I think that's another issue here is that clubs where money is so hard to come by, if they're having to pay players for an extended period of time, it could be the thing that tips them over the edge. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons that we've reached the situation we have with the National League.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and financially as well. I was reading an article saying, oh, the aim in terms of the Football League, which is obviously the level above, is to finish the season. But even in the Football League, you were getting clubs saying, whoa, hang on, if we play the rest of the season, we are likely to go bust because the television, the television money isn't in the same league as the Premier League, where of course that is the main source of income. And obviously in the Football League, it doesn't filter down the same. They're having issues. They would have issues with furloughing. It's a bit different, as we say, in the Football League, because I know in the National League and when I went to do non-league coverage, it was quite weird because you start the season in the non-league with some clubs, and you'd end the season with almost an entirely new 11, depending on who the club were, because again, they're on much shorter contracts. But even in the Football League, when you've got players on season-long contracts, yearly contracts, that's really difficult to deal with, isn't it? If they are forced to continue the season, as I say, then players are on furlough. Some of them, I believe, because again, they're not on the crazy money of the Premier League. So, is it essentially at the moment we're looking at, okay, you can play the Premier League behind closed doors, do this, finish the season, possibly. That's not even a guarantee. But anyone below that, you're risking some kind of financial security, not just with the non-league, but with many of the Football League.
Well, I think what this is ultimately going to lead to, if we look maybe slightly further down the line, and I'm kind of isolating football here, but I think it's a wider societal thing, is that I think a lot of business, and football's certainly included in this, will be looking at how it runs itself. The sustainability. Clearly, a worldwide pandemic is an incredibly unusual situation. I accept that, but I think there is clubs and other businesses, but we're highlighting football here. They're run on a very short-term nature in terms of cash flow. And I think if you have a problem like this, it's almost like the self-employed individual. If you've got a self-employed individual who maybe has budgeted for the fact that they may break their leg, let's say, for example, and they can't work for a few months, if they put that money aside, or they're fortunate to be in a position where they're able to put money aside, then they can get through that. But I think if you're always living right up to the point where if anything goes wrong, then you're in trouble. And I think that, in a nutshell, really is how football has run itself in many areas for too long. Perhaps it does require a rethink, but it would be tremendously sad if clubs were to go out of business as a result of this. And I desperately hope that doesn't happen, because I'm fortunate to cover all levels of football, and from the Champions League and the Premier League down to the National League. And I have to say that it's an absolute pleasure to cover the National League, because it gives you, particularly in what I do as a commentator, it gives you a different sort of insight. You're able to actually go and talk to managers. Many managers would say, come and have a drink, come and have a coffee with us before the game or whatever. And you can sit and do that. And you can ask them about the players and ask them about the tactics, get under the skin of it all. And it's just such a nice thing to do. some people sometimes say it's like real football, that, isn't it? And I don't necessarily. I think real football applies to the Premier League as well, but I understand where they're coming from. Is that you can really feel it when you cover a league like the National League. And yeah, I just really hope that clubs can get through this, exceptionally difficult time. I really, really do.
I feel like it's almost authenticity, isn't it? Like you say, with that, you feel like you're a part of the game as opposed to just simply broadcasting on an event where you're looking on from almost a bird's eye view. You in the non-league, it's almost like you're on the same level. You, as you say, you can talk to the manager. I mean, when we used to cover it in Lancaster, you get fans coming up saying, "Oh, can we talk about something or other?" And they were all so lovely. I mean, I was thankful actually because we could have had some real hooligans behind us saying God knows what, but thankfully, the Lancaster locals were quite good. And I completely agree. A completely different way of looking at and covering football. But just on the other end of the scale, actually, really. I know this is quite a bleak start to the podcast, so it does get better after this. But it's all quite dour at the moment. And I was reading somewhere that pubs and clubs and attending football matches might not be possible till next year, which was quite a scary prospect, but a very realistic one as well. So I guess, do we need to imagine top flight football? So all of Europe's elite leagues. Do we have to imagine the future of those for the time being behind closed doors? Is that what we've got to get used to?
I suspect we do. And, the fundamental difference between, we've talked about the fact that National League clubs have said, not unanimously, but overwhelmingly, that they want to end the season here. Of course, the big difference and the reason why Premier League clubs won't necessarily say that is because of the TV revenues. That is the big difference. And the fact that there's around £750 million at stake, so I'm led to believe, in terms of finishing the season and TV revenues. And I think, provided that the clubs can keep that TV revenue, from what I gather, and speaking to people within the game, that would appear enough to keep the Premier League clubs, the elite clubs, going. That TV revenue is everything. The gate receipts are nice, and obviously they'd love to have them. But the TV revenue is what keeps everything flowing. That's by far the overwhelming factor here. So I think that Premier League clubs, certainly in the short term, could quite probably, when you consider the TV revenue, sustain themselves just on without gate receipts. And I think when you read the science about this, you read the scientific opinion, it becomes more and more abundantly clear that in terms of mass gatherings, we are months away from being able to do that. And depending on which scientist you listen to, it could be anything from a few months to 12 months. That just depends on the individual's opinion. So yes, I think it is something that we as supporters are going to have to get used to in the short to medium term. And who knows, going forwards, we just don't know how this will all pan out in terms of waves of this. And will it come back and we'll have to go into further lockdown? It's all a very uncertain picture at the moment. And of course that has, people talk about the end of one season. We look at the restart of the start of the next one. And this is of particular relevance, really, the further you go down the pyramid, because of course I say that the Premier League clubs aren't so reliant on gate receipts. Well, clubs at, particularly at League One, League Two and National League level, they are way more reliant on gate receipts. For a National League club, that is their greatest source of income. So if they weren't able to play in front of crowds for, say, 6 months, that creates then another issue, and we start getting into the realms of, can it be sustainable? Can it keep going? And I really, really hope that they can find ways to make it sustainable.
Well, yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you've just said. And again, there's a massive scale we're looking at here. In terms of in terms of yourself and in terms of other journalists and people in the sports media industry, I suppose it is kind of important that there is some action to have, because, journalists can't keep reporting on Troy Deeney's favourite kind of aftershave. They need to find some kind of, some kind of thing to commentate on and to cover, because it's not just people, I suppose, even in sport, that have been affected in terms of the jobs of the footballers and so forth. There's a whole industry that rely on covering this and rely on stories and interviews and so forth. So I guess for them and the credibility of sports journalism, it's important that something is going ahead even during this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me to speak from a sort of a selfish point of view, then yeah, absolutely. I mean, people's incomes have been completely put on hold. You'll find that a lot of, I mean, I've worked in this kind of line of work all my working life, and you know, the vast majority of people who work within, say, TV sport will be self-employed. You know, and I'm not just talking about commentators and presenters. I'm talking about cameramen, riggers, people who will work in the background in a studio, in what we would call a gallery. The vast majority of these people are self-employed, and a lot of them will have found that their incomes will have basically stopped because, I mean, I won't get into the complexities of the system that's been rolled out by the Chancellor in terms of keeping people in pets so that people have some money, but there are certain people working within that industry who would fall through the net in that respect. People who, for example, are directors within limited companies, they pretty much fall through the net, really. There's only a very small amount of money they can claim. So yeah, I mean, it affects everybody in that respect, and everybody clearly wants it back as soon as possible. But it's one of those things in life where, you know, everybody's got to try and balance economic, societal, and medical concerns all at the same time, and it's tremendously difficult. And I feel for those who've got to make the big decisions in all of this, whether that be the Premier League or the government. These are exceptionally difficult decisions that need to be made with a whole host of pressures from every different angle, and a lot of opinion out there as well, which I understand, and a lot of passionate opinion too. So it's so difficult for all concerned. But you just hope that we can get things back up and running in a way that is safe. I think that has to be the overriding priority, and it's why people are watching so very closely. How, for example, in Germany, the Bundesliga are looking at coming back. I mean, they've suggested that they could return in early May. I think that's subject to what the German government says. But I think a lot of people will be watching there. But isn't it funny that it shows you how confused the picture is right now? That just across the border in the Netherlands, they've abandoned the season. The top flight season's been abandoned. So that shows you just how everyone's going to have different ways of working this.
No, yeah, I mean, again, unprecedented times is probably the most commonly used phrase of the past, I don't know, few weeks. I think Gary Lineker tweeted it. It's been unprecedented times. Everything's unprecedented times. We don't know what's going on. Everything's crazy. That was quite bleak. The outlook isn't looking too good, but let's go to something a little bit nicer. And we'll go back to all the way back to 1999, when you went to Nottingham Trent University, studying broadcast journalism. I have to ask Adam, I asked Ian this as well when he was on. He wasn't really sure when he was growing up what he wanted to go into, in terms of whether he thought, because he was quite, he told me he was quite a shy person, didn't necessarily feel like he'd go into commentary, but he did always have a love for sport, and he eventually went that route, not the university route, but he did lots of voluntary work, got into the BBC and went that way up, and fair play to him, he's become one of the best commentators in the past 30 years. So you went to university doing broadcast journalism. I mean, that's quite a specific degree. I mean, I went to do English literature, which basically meant I wanted to be unemployed after I left. But I'm only joking to the people who taught me the brilliant degree. But of course, when you do something like broadcast journalism, it's very specific, isn't it? So that tells me that you knew exactly what you wanted to go into from the start, and that was the career for you.
Well, when I left school, I knew that I wanted to do something to do with sport, and I knew that I wanted to do something that involved words, because I just always felt that, you know, I knew about sport, knew about football, and I was a lot better at English than I was at maths. So I just felt like that was a logical thing to pursue. And before I went to university, I actually had a year out, and I worked not within journalism, but I worked at a newspaper. I worked in various areas of it, predominantly in sales, and it let me have a look at how a newspaper works, and it let me speak to the journalists involved on a local newspaper. And the overriding feelings I got back from them was that they quite enjoyed their job, but it was very low pay at the time for what was extreme for a local paper. There was a lot of pressure, there was a lot of hours. And it was amazing how many of them said, you know, think very long and hard as to whether you want to go into this. Well, I decided that I still wanted to go into kind of a journalistic style of career. But I thought, well, maybe I should have a look at broadcasting. Maybe the sort of broadcast side of it could be more appealing. And I did, and liked what I saw, and liked the feedback that I got off people that I talked to. So I decided to do a broadcast journalism degree at Nottingham Trent University, which, you know, really enjoyed Nottingham. I'd grown up in Southport near Liverpool, and enjoyed living there and enjoyed the course. Did that for 3 years, and you learn all aspects of it. So,
Mm.
radio, TV, news, you'd learn how to be a
Mm.
journalist, a broadcast journalist. You'd learn how to film. You'd learn how to do radio editing. It was like dual in that respect. It was both radio and TV. So it was a good grounding in it, and it prepared me well to then go into the media industry after that.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about doing quite a lot of newspaper and journalism style roles straight on the back actually of that university degree. But then in 2007, football commentator presenter for Man U TV. I mean, that's sort of maybe a step up from that. I mean, I was talking to Ian about when he made the BBC for the first time. He felt like that was kind of the verification. Is like, yes, I've made it. I've gone from doing the odd job and doing voluntary and getting paid to going to an established place of work to hone his craft to then go on to Sky Sports. Was Man U TV one of those where you thought, right, that's that elevation from what I've been doing, and maybe this is another a step up onto greater things?
Well, it was. I have to say that a lot of people take different routes. I always say no commentator really ever prepares in the same way, and I think it's very similar in terms of the routes that people take. I mean, if I rewind a little bit, I mean, the first thing that I did after leaving university was I worked on what's called RSLs, which is restricted service licenses, which are basically when a company gets a radio license on a temporary basis to test whether the public want them to do a full-time radio station in that area, and whether the company involved want to base them. So it's like a 3-month test period. And I remember starting out just in Torbay and Barrow. I lived in Barrow for a month and Torbay for a month, worked in a caravan, broadcasting on there. And then off the back of that, I then got my first full-time job in radio, where that was really for me where I got a fantastic grounding. I was lucky to work with my boss in that first radio station was an ex-commentator called Tony Delahunty, who really gave me a good. In fact, it was him that first said, "I want you to have a go at commentating," and I did everything there. It was a lovely small local radio station, very successful in the area, and I did everything. I presented, I read the news, I went out and got the news, I did football commentary, football reporting, outside broadcasts, and really just for 3 years did absolutely everything you could think you could do in radio. And then from there, I went freelance in 2006. And then worked in newsrooms, predominantly in radio, right across the East Midlands, did that. And then I started to do more football reporting. I worked for Radio City covering Tranmere. I did Wigan Athletic for Wish FM. MUTV, as you just mentioned, was another thing that came along at that time, where I started doing stuff for them and started to then gradually get more into TV, and MUTV was part of that. I also did other club type stuff. That's a great way in for young commentators in terms of learning how to do TV, is to work for club TV stations. So, for example, I worked for a company who produced programmes for Everton and Portsmouth, and one or two others as well, and started doing things like that. Then gradually worked up again and started doing world feed commentaries for UEFA. And it's just a very, very gradual process, learning your trade, making your mistakes. And then eventually, if I go all the way up to 2013 when BT Sport launched. And I was very fortunate that they liked what they heard when I sent them a demo and gave me an opportunity. And I'll always be so thankful for that the guys there that gave me a chance. And hopefully, I've made the most of that and really look to push on again. But it's tremendously competitive, tremendously demanding. You've got to be in it for the long haul. You've got to be able to accept that doors are going to get slammed in your face all the time. And you've got to be just really, really dedicated to what you do and that journey. So if you look at it from when I started uni in 1999 to when BT launched in 2013, that's 14 years of really very, very gradually working your way up the ladder.
No, I mean that's fascinating. Really, you managed to cover them 14 years so efficiently. And I mean, if it was me, we'd be here for 3.5 hours, and I'd just be talking about every. But that was really concise and really good. And I'd just like to say, actually, you mentioned when you went into commentary, when you went from newsroom to journalism, and then you were into commentary on the advice of one of your old bosses. Could you look back on those first commentaries and compare them to now and think, God, there's been such a transition in terms of how you've developed? Because I know one of the things I found when I first did 1 or 2 commentaries, and obviously not on the same scale as you, but when I did them, I like to think I can talk quite a lot, but 90 minutes of constantly being focused on the ball, following the action completely, it's very hard, isn't it?
It's funny because I remember when I did my first commentary, it it was Cambridge United against Mansfield Town at the Abbey Stadium, and I remember thinking, my first game I could do with just something quite calm here. You know, nothing major happened in the first 10 minutes. And I remember Mansfield, I think I'm pretty certain it was either 3-2 or 4-3. I think it was 3-2 to Mansfield. They ended the game with 9 men. Keith Curle had a confrontation on the pitch at half time with a policeman. It was absolute chaos. And I just remember thinking at the end of that game, I love this. I've absolutely got the bug for this. But before the game, I remember I asked someone I knew who'd done a lot of commentary just for some advice. And in terms of what you just said there about talking, they just said if you'd fallen off a cliff and you were holding on by your fingertips, you wouldn't let go, would you? I said, well, no, obviously I wouldn't. No, so he said, well, just don't stop talking then. And that was kind of decent advice for radio. But then, of course, then you get into the differences between radio and TV commentary and how you have to learn that there are very big differences between the two as you sort of work between the two, as I ended up working in television as well. But so, yeah, I remember as well another guy who I worked with when I was a very young commentator who was a commentator themselves, and they used to have somebody else drive part of the journey home because they were so exhausted from everything they'd given in terms of the commentary that they were scared they'd fall asleep at the wheel. So I never quite suffered that badly, but it can really take a lot out of you, particularly radio commentary. You get more used to it over the years, and maybe it doesn't affect you quite so bad. But yeah, I love it. It's a great buzz. Radio commentary was my first love. I just love the fact that people are. Literally every word you say is painting a picture for people. Every word you say, particularly even the way that your voice goes ever so slightly up and down, that can be the difference between somebody who's casually listening in their kitchen, and then if the pitch of your voice slightly changes, they're out of their kitchen and they're listening to the radio. And I think that's wonderful. It's a real privilege as a broadcaster, I think, to have that level of influence over somebody who's listening to a coverage of a sport that they love.
No, absolutely. I mean, you hit that right with the variation in tones. I mean, there's nothing more satisfying, I imagine, because even I got a buzz with a perfectly good goal call. Oh God, that sounds so wrong in my northern accent. I'm switching goal call. I don't know, but anyway, when you get that spot on, and I do change my voice slightly when I've done it. I mean, there's no better feeling in the world, is there? When there's maybe a 30-yard howitzer from someone from just rifling it top corner. You've said the name, you've got the elongation on the name. It sounds perfect. I mean, as you say, you talk about buzzers. There must be no greater buzz than absolutely nailing a goal call. And by contrast, I suppose, there must be not much of a greater sense of disappointment than making a bit of a mess of a goal call, because sometimes you might not be quite on the same wavelength.
Yeah, I can remember when I was first starting out, and I think one of the ways that you become better at anything, and I can only speak for what's been my profession or my working life, is broadcasting. I think you have to be your biggest critic, for one. And I think that you also have to religiously listen back to what you do, and you have to watch back what you do as well, because that's the only way that you get better. And nobody, if you really want to be, very good at what you do, you have to be really dedicated. And I think that you have to be your biggest critic, as I said, and really listen back. And I used to do that a lot. And I can remember if I got something wrong, particularly as you said with a goal call or something like that, I can remember just savagely beating myself up for days and days and days. I think I've got better at that over the years, because I think from experience tells you that anyone can make a mistake in any given moment. It's just about learning from it and making sure that you make them as infrequently as possible. But yeah, you're right. In terms of when you feel like you've got a call on a goal right, it's a great feeling. The whole job is just a great buzz. I think it's why I'm missing it so much at the moment, because every time you do the job, every time you cover a game, it's a buzz. It's an adrenaline rush, and it's something that you can't really replicate. A bit like a player would say, you can't replicate scoring a goal. But I think sometimes as well as a commentator, you can think that maybe you've nailed something, and then you watch it back and you think, you know what, actually, I took too much there. Or equally, you can think you've not nailed something, and then maybe watch it back and think, you know what, that was actually better than I thought it was. I always remember one that always sticks in my mind was the playoff final between Tranmere and Boreham Wood for the National League, covering it for BT a couple of years ago. It was an incredible game. And I remember the winner by James Norwood. I remember commentating at the time, and it was one of those crazy games where so much happened, and at the end of the match, it was all a bit of a blur. And I just remember thinking after the final whistle had gone and everything, we'd gone off air. I just remember thinking, I'm not sure I did that winning goal justice.
Do you want to
I'm just not
replicate it
sure
right
whether.
now?
I'm off at the minute. I just didn't feel like I'd done it justice. And do you know what? The interesting thing is that I can honestly say, hand on heart, that I have never had a reaction to a goal more than I did from Tranmere supporters for that goal. Saying that they'll remember what I said forever. These Tranmere. And it's funny that at the time I thought, I'm not quite sure I did that justice, but then. It was a very simple goal call. It wasn't one where there was, a lot of, you feel that filled every second. And I think that's a big lesson for me as a commentator, one that I've tried to learn over the years. That very, very often in this job, less is more. And that was definitely an example of that, where less was more.
Well, absolutely. I remember you're absolutely spot on in terms of your voice or a commentator's voice staking in the narrative of a fan base. I mean, when Burnley went into the Premier League for the first time, when Wade Elliott put a ball in the top corner, I think myself and many Burnley fans who were watching that and look back to it always remember Bill Leslie's call for that, because it was an absolute peach of a, brilliant goal, brilliant call, and and obviously Martin Tyler for Sergio Aguero. So you're absolutely right. I think certain voices will resonate with an entire fan base, and of course yourself in that with Tranmere as well. Lots on there. We will come back to career in a second, but just to deviate slightly from that, we'll have a bit of a throwback into the early 2000s. So 2000, I think it's they call that the noughties, don't they? I should have really researched that. They do. Fantastic. It's a bit of a. I wasn't sure, but I'm glad I'm right. So the noughties era, 2000 to 2009, was an era I grew up in. And you were starting the commentary business, the journalism business, straight off the back of university. So quite a big era for both of us. Just before we go into this, actually, was there anyone in the 90s, or just in your teenage years, who were your real heroes then? Who did you look at and think, oh, I love these players? First, who were you a Nottingham Forest? You should be a Nottingham Forest supporter, really.
No, I've lived half my life in the Northwest, and I've lived half my life in Nottinghamshire. So I suppose I followed Mansfield because they're my local team. They were the first team I started covering. I've always got a soft spot for Forest. The Merseyside clubs will always watch out for. Southport was my local team. I've always had a love of Italian football. So I'm a bit all over the place, really, in terms of who I follow and the leagues that I follow. I've always been a little bit like that. But no, Forest is, I tell you what, I would love Forest to be back in the Premier League. I have to say that. It's my sort of local big club. That would be absolutely fantastic, and I love commentating there as well. It's fantastic, the City Ground. But no, they're not my team, so to speak. There.
I'm just glad you didn't say Man United, because so many people that just sort of deviate to that. I have nothing against Manchester United. If you live in Manchester, that's absolutely fantastic. However, it does annoy me sometimes when people, just supported Man United. Why? Oh, they were doing so well in the various competitions. No, I'm glad you said Mansfield, and I'm glad you said other clubs. But anyway, on to the 2000s. For me, I think in the noughties it was like an amazing. I know I was growing up in it, and as I say, you were going into the industry then. But for me, that was an amazing decade of just some absolute superstars that it's always nice to reflect back on. There's no real better time than now, I don't think. So I've come up with about 26 players, and we're going to do a 1 to 11 of our sort of established best decade 11. I'll probably miss one or two off, so if anyone wants to send hate mail, they can do. But I think I've picked out some of the best names per position. I'm going to let you have the final say on some of these. So from that era, for me, the two keepers that stand out, I think, are Buffon and Casillas. Both legendary goalkeepers of the time. I personally think one was. I always had a preference for one over the other, but I'll let you decide. Who would you go for that keeper of the decade?
Well, as I've just said to you, I do have a fondness for Italian football, and I think that maybe that makes me a little bit biased here, but I think I'd have to go with Buffon for that one.
I completely agree.
What a presence in the game.
Yeah,
what a presence in the game that he's been.
No, he has. Casillas was also a legend of a man, but I did think There were occasions when I'd watch Casillas, and as amazing a goalkeeper as he was, I always thought there was a little chink in his armour somewhere. I always thought sometimes maybe on crosses, he wasn't quite as effective as Buffon, not quite as commanding. He had all the confidence in the world to come out and claim, crosses and come out and deal with danger. But I always felt Buffon was you felt a bit more confident with him doing it than Casillas. Maybe because Buffon was taller, more physically dominating. Casillas was quite small. For a goalkeeper, 6 foot, 6'1", Buffon really, really big, and I don't know. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've always admired about Buffon, and particularly the Juventus team, that's in terms of their prolific run of success that started under Conte, I always admired the collective defensive unit and the attitude. I always remember so often seeing Buffon and Bonucci and Chiellini when they just simply didn't concede a goal. It was not behind for a corner. The three of them would almost be, they would be in a huddle and celebrating like they'd scored a goal. And I absolutely love that. I love that attitude, and I love his mentality. I think for me in sport and in football, mentality is under discussed. I think it's absolutely crucial. If I was in charge of recruitment at a big club, I would research as much as I possibly could into players' mentality, not just their ability. And I'm sure they do that, because I think it's so important. And Buffon, I'm not saying Casillas' mentality isn't great, but I've seen a lot more of Buffon, and I think his mentality is amazing.
Yeah, two elites of the game. I'd like to say as well, I think there was a save in the final of the 2003 Champions League final. Buffon, I think it was Inzaghi, I'm not 100% sure, but he did a reflex save from 6 yards. Then he made it look so easy. It was one of the best saves I've seen in a Champions League final. I mean, right now you've got the positioning, the leadership, and everything from Buffon, but obviously he's a lot slower because of his age. But then he had everything, didn't he? As we say, the complete package. Okay. One word answer for all the defenders, and then we'll do a quick summary. So at right back, Lahm or Cafu? We're thinking prime years as well in that decade.
That's tough.
One word answer for the defenders, and then we'll do a summary.
I'll go with Cafu.
Cafu. Good one word answer there, Adam. Terry or Puyol? John Terry or Carlos Puyol?
Puyol.
Maldini or Cannavaro?
Cannavaro.
Ooh. And I think this left back is quite good in parallel with right back. So Roberto Carlos or Ashley Cole?
Ashley Cole.
Yeah, I think if you pick Cafu for balance, it makes sense to pick Cole, and vice versa. If you pick Lahm, probably Roberto Carlos. Okay, those four. Yeah, I mean, I'll be quick with summary. Yeah, I think you've picked. Yeah, attacking a Cafu, more defensive-minded Ashley Cole. Carlos Puyol, I think I'd have over Terry. Maldini or Cannavaro is going to be a very divisive one. But I think Maldini I think he won the Ballon d'Or in the 90s, not the noughties. Cannavaro did win the Ballon d'Or in the noughties. Go on then. That's a hard one. I'll let you explain why you picked as you've picked. Go on.
Well, I think you're right in terms of the balance. I mean, look, we're talking here about absolute elite level players. You could quite, if this was court in a court, we could quite easily make a great case for either. But they just. I think Ashley Cole, I think it's widely accepted that he was the best left back in the world for quite some time. I think that I always judge or try to judge what you might term as great teams and great players on longevity, because for me, that is the greatest test of anybody's true ability is longevity. How long can you cut it at the absolute highest level, and how much can you win in that time? And whilst all of those players are well decorated, I just think the consistency that Cole had, particularly for Arsenal and Chelsea, the size that he played in, and I think as well that whilst the epitome of the modern fullback in terms that he could get forward, I think he was also pretty good defensively as well. And whereas there are other defenders who, Roberto Carlos maybe being one of them, who we talk a lot about the crosses he could whip in, the free kicks that he could hit. We talk less about maybe him defensively. And I think that perhaps plays a part with me and with Ashley Cole in terms of Cannavaro and what he did with Italy as a national side as well around that time. And the mid noughties was absolutely incredible. Nesta as well, what a player he was. So and Maldini's longevity with Milan, one club man, absolutely incredible. But you picked some good players there, I tell you.
No, I mean, like I say, I mean, that decade is one where you had, it's very different because that was the very elite Milan side, wasn't it? I mean, the 90s and the noughties, Milan were outstanding, and it's a shame they've regressed as they have. And also, you obviously had the two Spanish giants. We had the main four in England. They were literally, I mean, peak Arsenal, United, Liverpool, Chelsea were phenomenal. Arsenal under Wenger, where they were doing very well. Obviously, the Invincibles. Jose Mourinho inspiring Chelsea to the rise that they had. Sir Alex Ferguson's Man United, and of course Liverpool under Rafa Benitez at 2 Champions League finals. So, they're again phenomenal. Okay, this one defensive. Okay, 3 or 4 midfielders, depending on what formation it is. So it's either a 4-1-2-1-2, maybe a 4-3-3. This is quite hard, I think. So Makelele or Vieira? We'll one word answer, and then we'll discuss at the end of that.
Vieira.
Ooh. Okay. This is in 3 because I was really struggling. So I've put these into 3 categories. So Zidane, Xavi, or Seedorf.
This is all. I know you said one word, but this is all very dependent on how your team's going to play, isn't it?
True.
In terms of just who I'd like the best out of those 3 players, Zidane.
I was happy you went with Zidane. Okay. Classic trio of English players: Scholes, Gerrard, or Lampard.
Gerrard.
And depending on, this could be a 4-3-3 or a 4-1-2-1-2. Kaká or Ronaldinho? In their prime. This is 50-50.
I just love everything about the way that this guy played the game. Just his whole personality. So I'll say Ronaldinho.
I knew it. Yeah. Okay. So looking back at those then, so we've got sort of a 4-1-2-1-2 there, or a 4-3-3, depending on how the other 2 go. Yeah, I mean, Makelele Vieira. Makelele was given, they called the defensive midfielder Claude Makelele role, so naturally you went with the other person.
Yeah. Different types of player, though, really.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah. I think Vieira's a bit more technical, maybe, I would have said. Makelele very much, well, I suppose you could say almost model N'Golo Kante now in some ways. That he was.
Some ways, yeah.
In some ways. Obviously not quite the same player, but... yeah, there is that attraction, but yeah, Vieira as well. Also, personality on the pitch, wasn't he? Just him. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Keane and Vieira, Best of Enemies. I mean, that's a phenomenal program, and it tells you all you need to know about both of the players. The only reason I didn't pick Keane actually was because it was mainly the 90s, for Roy Keane as opposed to the noughties. So that sort of sorted that out. Yeah, Zidane. Poetry in motion, probably in midfield.
Yeah, just a glorious player to watch. Just so elegant, physically imposing as well. Which you could say the same about Vieira, because we look a bit further forwards, and the focus became much more on the small technical players. And I think that showed how football changed. Is that players like Vieira and Zidane, they. Particularly Zidane, obviously in this respect, they combined that real elegance, that technical quality, with also being imposing physically and real athletes. And I think that the sort of the fashion, if we just look slightly further forward beyond them, certainly changed in that respect. Barcelona and Guardiola were obviously an absolutely and tiki-taka was fundamental to all of that. But I really admired Zidane for so many different reasons. Elegance is the word that really springs to mind when I think about him.
No, a tremendous player. Almost, well, the perfect all-round midfielder. I mean, in many ways, could do the lot. Gerrard seems to be the answer everyone seems to be going for now, because it used to be a really big debate, didn't it? And now everyone just says Gerrard. I think I think it's more.
I think
Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think for me, when we look back now at Liverpool at that time, Gerrard's ability. I mean, I remember tweeting only a few weeks ago when there was a rerun of the Champions League final from 2005 on, and it struck me at the time, obviously, but when you look back, it really does emphasise just how big an effect that Steven Gerrard had on that Liverpool team of that entire sort of era. In that, they would never have been anywhere near the final without him, and they certainly wouldn't have won the final without him. This is a player who in the final stages of that game was at right back and absolutely out on his feet. He'd scored the goal that had got them back into it. And I think in a microcosm, that summed up the level of influence that he had on that team. And he's such a rarity, Gerrard, in that, you talk about a midfielder who's able to do everything. I just don't see anything like him in the game right now. The closest that I've seen in covering football in the last 10 years or so, and he's nowhere near him, but I could sort of see similarities would be Raja Nainggolan, in that real all-action, can put his foot in, but can score goals, can pick a pass, can get from box to box. And it's very hard to see anybody who's able to do what Gerrard does. He was an absolutely phenomenal footballer. To be slightly controversial, I would actually say that in some ways, I think Liverpool was so reliant on him during that time that I actually think as a club, it might even have held them back in terms of their development as a team, because I think a little bit like you see with any club that has one absolute standout player, I think they can become too reliant on them, and it prevents others from growing around them and developing perhaps as much as they would do. And I think in some ways that could perhaps have held Liverpool back a little bit. But what a player! Just absolutely phenomenal footballer, really was.
Yeah, potentially holding Liverpool back. That's one of our 20-minute segment highlights now for the promotion. So expect some bashing after. No, it's a very good point.
As long as it's taken in context.
When's it ever taken in context? Never taken in context. Don't be silly. Anyway, I'm glad you mentioned that final, actually, because I also watched that final, a rerun of that final. Such is the case that there's nothing much football related now. And Kaká was absolutely unbelievable in that final. Even though they went out they went out on penalties. Oh my God, the unbelievable. And I mean, to be fair, everyone said the pass, but the finish, whew, I mean, it was on his standing foot, incredible. Yeah, but the pass, absolutely incredible. Also watched against United again, where he was absolutely amazing against the Sir Alex Ferguson United team at Old Trafford. I think they won 3-0. And two of the goals he scored were phenomenal. This is just my counter argument to Ronaldinho, because that's the popular answer. Obviously, growing up, Ronaldinho, he smile on his face. Unbelievable skills. I don't think, probably rivals anyone in the modern day for skills with a football. However, I think for ability to, I think at their pomp, in their elite, I do think Kaká was the better player. I do think that, because I think he was AC Milan. He was, when they were doing so well, he would, and Man City were linked with him, Real Madrid were linked with him. I actually think if he'd have gone to Manchester City, he might have, I think we'd have seen a better Kaká than the one that went to Real Madrid and seemingly got lost in a club that spent so much on so many players, and he just became a sum of the parts in many ways. His brilliance was kind of lost. But in that Milan team, when the iconic where I belong to Jesus shirt, and he's in Old Trafford, and you just realise this guy is a phenomenon. But obviously, you can argue everything against that with Ronaldinho, who was, he went to the Hogwarts School of Football, didn't he? He was just amazing with his tricks.
Well, they were, even in terms of their backgrounds, how they grew up, they're so different, aren't they? Yeah. Ronaldinho and Kaká, and their approaches not just to the game of football, but training, life, very just complete contrasts. But still, both incredibly blessed in terms of the natural talent and ability that they had. I would argue, as I think probably most people would, that maybe Kaká was the more disciplined of the two of them. Certainly would have been more attuned, more adapt, more suited to playing in Italian football than Ronaldinho would have been, where the tactical requirements on a player are much greater than perhaps they would be in the Premier League or La Liga, where of course he did so well with Barcelona. So yeah, I suppose you're looking you're looking at a real stark contrast there. So I suppose it was a good question to ask two very different types of personality as well as different players. Yeah.
I 100% know if this went to a poll, Ronaldinho would win, because he can't. It's really hard to argue the other side. But as we say, two phenomenal players. They're all phenomenal players. So if we go on to the strike force, this is quite an interesting one, I think. Messi, young Messi. So what we're looking at, 2004 up to about 2009. So as he was growing and rising with Barcelona, phenomenal then, even not quite where he was now or had been for the past decade. Still phenomenal numbers and scored some amazing goals. Or prime Thierry Henry at Arsenal.
Oof. Well, I think the key word that I have to go on there is prime. And if you're talking prime, then Thierry Henry, it's a measure of just how good he was in his prime that I would pick him above a developing Messi. Thierry Henry is probably, along with Messi, the best player I've ever seen in the flesh, ever watched live. I remember it was one of the first radio games I commentated from. In fact, I think it was the first ever Premier League commentary I did for radio. And Arsenal absolutely took Aston Villa apart at the old Highbury. It was the one and only time I went to Highbury. And it was an incredible day, and Henry was just unplayable that day. He just toyed with them, ripped them to shreds at Premier League defence. And what a player he was. Just, I mean, you've seen as much of him as I have. You know where I'm coming from. And
Tremendous.
You could make a strong argument that I know there's strong competition here, but you could make a very good argument that he's the best foreign player ever to play in the Premier League, and that's a huge compliment, I would suggest.
I wouldn't argue with that in the slightest. Yeah, tremendous player. Do you think that he was? No, you're not going to say he was robbed, because that's controversial and another clickbait thing. But he was. He had an incredible season the year Ronaldinho won the Ballon d'Or. Do you think maybe he could have been Henry, or do you think? I mean, I've been told, a few people tell me that they feel he was robbed in the season when Ronaldinho won the Ballon d'Or. If you just look at his overall influence on the club, was he unfortunate? I'm not going to say that specific season, but was he unfortunate not to have got a Ballon d'Or, do you think, given how much he contributed to us?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because I think sometimes only in hindsight are players truly appreciated for what they were. And I sort of talk a little bit about Gerrard in that respect. It's funny, this will raise eyebrows, I know, but I was only thinking the other day how someone like Edin Dzeko, who a lot of people see as a figure of fun. I think when people look back, when he's retired 5 years from now, whatever, we'll look back and think, what a good player he was. 60 years now on the all-time list of goal scorers for a club the size of Roma. Had a good strike rate in the Premier League. Not fashionable, because he's a target man in an era where technical players have been much greater appreciated. But I think there's so many players you look at and you think, yeah, maybe it's within hindsight that we appreciate them that little bit better. But Henry was, he wasn't, he was surrounded by so many star players, so many elegant players in that Arsenal. Another one I absolutely adored watching was Robert Pires. What a fantastic player he was to watch. And then, someone like Dennis Bergkamp as well. So, Henry was very different in terms of, although he played in the same era as someone like Steven Gerrard, where Steven Gerrard was absolutely the standout player at Liverpool, the player that they couldn't do without. Whereas Henry, whilst he was utterly brilliant, was not necessarily the standout at Arsenal. There were, you might put him at the top, but very close behind him, there was a whole list of other players who were so influential. And maybe that's another reason why perhaps he didn't always get the absolute maximum attention that perhaps in terms of elite awards that maybe he deserved.
No, absolutely. A very good argument there. Last place. This is quite an interesting one. Cristiano Ronaldo for Manchester United throughout his time was in the noughties, and he had one season at Real Madrid, also Sporting Lisbon. Or the original Ronaldo during his time at Inter Milan. I think he had one season, and I think we're looking mainly in his Real Madrid years, where he obviously had quite a lot of success there. And of course, I think he had a remarkable 2002 World Cup where he scored a number of goals for Brazil. So people actually said that Brazilian Ronaldo was at his best at Barcelona during that season, where I think he scored about 35 goals. That was actually in the 90s. And after a slightly disappointing end to his Inter Milan career, he was excellent at Real Madrid, of course, phenomenal striker, but maybe not quite at the peak level in his club career that he was at Barcelona, but still phenomenal. That versus Cristiano Ronaldo, a player who was still in contention for the Ballon d'Or in his United time, but still not quite at his peak because obviously Real Madrid, his numbers are unbelievable. So who would you go with there?
We described two players who are one's just come out of their peak and one's just about to go into it, aren't you? So you're two players who are not quite at their peak. So makes that one really hard to call. It's funny, isn't it? And it just shows you how you shouldn't always judge players too quickly. Because in this world we live in right now, where everything's so instant and everyone's got a strong opinion, nobody ever seems to have an opinion that's like in the middle. And it's either, and it goes for everything in life, whether it be politics, footballers. Everyone seems to be either all over this way or all over that way. And I think there is a lot of the time there is actually a gaping space in the middle where people don't get their opinion quite right. And I remember Ronaldo, particularly, at the start of his Manchester United career, he was a figure of fun. People laughed at this guy. This was the one-trick pony. All he could do was step overs. And my goodness me, how he proved them wrong. And I think, if you look at his early stages of his Manchester United career, you would never, ever have predicted the monster that he would have gone on to become. So in terms of picking one, so hard this. I'd probably say the Manchester United Ronaldo in the final two seasons. I think particularly at the end of his Manchester, before he went to Real Madrid, he was becoming the absolute colossus that we saw. But as you said, Ronaldo, the Brazilian Ronaldo, was an unbelievable talent, a fantastic centre forward. We've never really seen anything truly like him again since. That maybe past his peak by then. But it's a really hard one. It's an absolute 50-50, that it really is.
No, I mean,
why don't you have the final call on that one?
No, you're all right. I think I'm not the one being interviewed, so I'll leave that with you. I mean, I think you might have made the right call, because I remember, I think it was 07-08, and Ronaldo got 31 Premier League goals and 44 in all competitions, which at the time
exactly, yeah,
was absolutely mad. Brazilian Ronaldo, when he went to Real Madrid, consistently hitting between 20 or 30 goals, which is again really, really good, and still phenomenal. When I say past his prime, I literally mean about maybe 85%, 90%, because he was still excellent. It was I think it's when he went to AC Milan. I think after he moved from Real Madrid, the career sort of went down a little bit from there. But yeah, no, that's a very good lineup. I'll be sure to get the graphic designers on that, so we can plug that a little bit. And there's some phenomenal players there. You can't really argue, I don't think, with any of those. But as you say, an era of strong opinions, so we'll still get the hate mail. So can't help that though. Go back to your career in terms of we sort of stopped halfway just to have that little segment. You went to BT. Which again is a new boy on the block, actually, big rival to Sky Sports now. I think it used to be Satan, to then ESPN. Then they were sort of, you saw those, I think, really as a customer in particular, as they were like, oh yeah, the big games are on Sky. Any of the sort of secondary games, they're probably on this other one. They're on ESPN or Satan. So they were never really considered the big rival to Sky Sports. When BT comes in, they really are considered this behemoth that wants to challenge Sky in any way possible. And as we say, you made a name for yourself on the non-league coverage, but also you've done various other things with Champions League, Europa League, recently Premier League. I think you were on the Burnley v Aston Villa game, weren't you, recently?
I was, yeah.
You were on the Burnley. Yeah. You were. I did watch that. That wasn't a good game, but you covered a lot of things there. I mean, is there any, since you've been at BT, how do you feel like your career's sort of deviated? Do you feel like you've a new step? Like, we're talking steps before, but was this like the big step? If Man U TV is being part of this big project, or which you still are a part of, was that like a, oh wow, this is finally, all my years of work is paying off and be recognised?
Yeah, I think that you look back to sort of, as you've said, it was very small steps throughout the media industry for 14 years, from being at university in 99 to BT's launch in 2013. And I think you always remember sort of what you said, those sort of key moments. And I think for me, that the time that I thought, I finally got to where, or I've got a chance of going where I really want to be, was when I got an email when BT Sport launched in 2013, and I'd done, I'd sent off the demo, and I'd hoped to get something back, an opportunity, and I got an email saying that basically I was in their list of commentators they intended to use for their European coverage, the Liga and Bundesliga and Serie A, which they had all the rights to at the time. And I got that email, and I can remember where I was. I can remember everything, because it was such a big moment in my life to get that. Because you have so many doors shut in your face over so many years. The emails that you have to send, the people you have to phone, and it can, if you're not a strong personality and you don't necessarily have a real belief in yourself, it can be that sort of thing where you could lose all enthusiasm, really, and all hope that you'll ever get to where you want to go. And I always kind of thought, I always backed myself that I had the ability to get to where I felt I wanted to go. And I think that's really important, that you've got to have that self-confidence. And I always kind of am backing myself. But I suppose with anybody in any line of work, there has to be a limit to it, where you think, if I've not got to where I want to be by this point, I've got to think about doing something else, because I need. And you have the pressures of money as well. As I had a young family at the time, I needed to be earning more money than I was at the time. And that email and that foot in the door that I got, it was one of those moments where I said, right, I've got this chance now, and I am going to absolutely make everything I can of this opportunity to make it at a national broadcaster, and be in something from the start. And really, that's always been so important to me, and it's why I was so pleased and so honoured to be part of the Amazon team, the Prime Video, I should say, team, from the beginning as well. Because to be in something from the start, I love that. To be part of building something is fantastic. And that was getting that chance with BT was huge. And then it's a little bit like the journey that I had from 99 to 2013, in that once I got in with that chance at BT, of course, I was a virtual unknown, really, in terms of some of the other names that they were using. Someone like Ian Dart, for instance, or Peter Drury, another fantastic commentator. So then you're almost starting at the bottom of another ladder, and then you have to work your way up that ladder as well. And hopefully I've done that over the years at BT. And it's just constantly proving yourself over and over and over again. You just have to keep proving yourself. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the pressure of that. It's great.
Well, ladders were meant to be climbed, so obviously that's my little philosophical comment for you and anyone who's listening. But I do. You mentioned the foreign football that you started with. Actually, I remember the European Football Show was one of my favourite programs. I thought it was an amazing thing that they had together. I was gutted when they decided to pull the plug on that, because that was an amazing sort of little setup. James Richardson, Julian Laurent, James Horncastle, Rafa Honigstein, yourself, you were quite prominent on the commentaries, and I think it was often it was either Serie A or Liga in the quarter to eight slot. They covered the Bundesliga as well. A phenomenal little setup there. So I mean, yeah. What did you think about that? It was a nice little gig to have. I know you were starting at maybe the bottom of that ladder, but that was a night that had. I remember when that was cancelled. Quite a lot of thousands of people thinking, hang on, this was an amazing show. This is one of the best shows, coverages of foreign football. I think it was on Sky, it was Revista de la Liga or something. I'm not sure, but they had a La Liga coverage, and BT's foreign coverage was practically unrivaled for many people. There was a real disappointment when it was cancelled. So was it a nice thing to be a part of a setup that had a little niche audience of people that really enjoyed it?
It was an absolute pleasure, and I would say it's one of a real highlight for me. It was, when I talk about moving up the ladder, it was something that allowed me to do that as well, because to be able to be a part of that show as I became, in terms of doing the commentary, was just an absolute privilege. And I remember sitting there every time I did it, and every single week it was a big game, whether it be PSG, Le Classique it might be, or it might be the Milan derby, it might be the Derby d'Italia. every single weekend. It was a really big game, and that was fantastic for me as a young commentator developing at a national broadcaster, because it allowed me to do huge games that were of massive importance in those particular leagues, but not necessarily with the pressures that would come with covering the equivalent fixture in this country. So the bosses at that time, when I was, starting out at BT, I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't an established name like Ian or Peter or people of that ilk. So they would never put me, for example, on a big Premier League game at that time. No. But they could justify using me for a big European game with a smaller audience. So it was great for me because I covered massive football matches without necessarily those pressures. So it was a great opportunity. It was a fantastic show to be a part. I mean, just to be on the same show as someone like James Richardson.
What an amazing guy. Yeah. Such a brilliant presenter.
And a nice man as well, someone who I've worked with quite a few times. I've even worked with James on the National League, actually, over the years. But, it was brilliant for me as someone who'd grown up watching Football Italia in the 90s as a little boy, to then end up kind of working on the same show as James. I remember the first time that he actually cued to me. He said, I'm over to San Siro now, where it's Adam Summerton. And I just remember thinking, that is brilliant. James Richardson's just cued over. And obviously, as time goes on, you get more and more used to it. But I remember at the time thinking, that's absolutely fantastic. And I think you have to get excited by stuff like that, because if you can't get excited by stuff like that, then you're probably in the wrong business. But yeah, you're right. It was an absolute privilege to work on. I loved working on that show. Yeah.
Well, no, it is, and BT has gone on, as we say, they got the Champions League rights, they got the European rights, real kick in the teeth of Sky, I think, at that point. And then they were seen as a realistic challenger. But more recently, we've had Amazon Prime come into the equation. They've got the rights. They've had the rights to, I think they had Boxing Day this year, and they had another set of last year, not this season, and they had another set of midweek games as well. So dipping the toes in, I think, is probably the right way to say how they've gone in this season. But I just thought it's interesting to see, because obviously Ian Dark did it as well. Ian Dark was on the commentaries. Do you see a Netflix, other streaming services are available, like Amazon Prime? Do you see this kind of style, this on-demand style, as the future? Instead of having dedicated channels, do you think it might be a case of pressing on the game that you want when it comes on, getting the coverage that way? Is that the way we're looking at? And just sort of to broaden out, could we expand that to TV, say in 10 to 15 years? Would you be surprised if the likes of the TV channels that we would become accustomed to were replaced entirely with on-demand style services, not just for sport, but for all kinds of entertainment?
I think with most things in terms of television, it's continually evolving. Nothing in television or the media at large tends to stay the same for very long. It's a very fluid type of industry. So I expect that, there will be plenty of change over the years. And I have to say that I think that when BT Sport was launched in 2013, I know that I'm probably biased here, admittedly, but I think that they were so refreshing for the whole market, because I think things had been done in a certain way for a long time, very successfully, I should say, by Sky. But BT came in and just said, no, we want to do things slightly differently, have our own take on things. And I think that those things have been really successful. The innovation that they've showed, even in terms of, I covered, for example, the WSL. That's been given fantastic coverage.
Incredible.
The amount of female pundits that we have now as well. So things are developing all the time in the TV industry. And I think a lot of it is consumer-led as well. And I think that if a consumer en masse are saying that they want something, then I think it's very hard to resist that tide of why would you? And I have to say, from working on the very first Amazon games, I keep saying Amazon Prime Video, working on the very first Prime Video games, the reaction to those was incredibly positive. And I think that people really enjoyed having that choice. We live in a world now where choice is king, isn't it? If you want to go into the supermarket, you've got
to stay 2 meters apart, choices. Adam. 2 meters.
Well, you have to do that, and not get too close to the other person when you're choosing between about 5 or 6, 7 or 8 different types of tomato sauce.
Yeah.
So we've got choice in all aspects of our life, and I think that that's I think it's inevitable, really, that comes to football. Obviously, a big barrier to this has always been the 3 o'clock blackout, in terms of broadcasters cannot show games. I mean, the amount of times I've been asked, why did BT not show the afternoon game from Germany at a 2:30 game in Germany? And it's remarkable how many people don't realise the fact that we're not allowed to. So I think that's always been a barrier to that. And whether they'll be able to work around that, who knows? But I think in principle, the idea of both games being broadcast via the internet, for one, and games being broadcast so you have multiple choice. I think there is clearly a future in all that. But I suspect that the likes of Sky and BT will also wish to remain very much in the market. I think they're proving that with the investments that they're making into sports broadcasting right now, in terms both of rights that they're purchasing, and also infrastructure that they're all building as well. And it's great to have such a market in the UK.
No, absolutely. I just have to ask, before we go on to your team of the season choices, Adam, do you ever get mistaken for working on A Question of Sport?
No.
No. I mean, it's a very good comparison, Marty. And Matt Dawson's a very well-groomed man. I get Richard Hammond, so I think you're winning out of the two of us. I think. I just had to throw that one in there. But anyway, you're not a rugby. Well, actually, are you a rugby man? Are you into your rugby at all?
No,
I'm
not. No. Egg chasing's never been for me, I'm afraid.
No. But we'll move on to your team of the season picks, actually, because I'm happy to say that I agreed on most of these, and you're not too far off Ian either. So we're doing quite good on that score. So talk us through then. I'll leave the floor is yours. In goal, Sheffield United.
Well, I had a straight choice really there of Pope of Burnley, which you might have appreciated me going for, or Henderson. And I just think that what Sheffield United have done this season, particularly defensively, it's been remarkable. Really, it's the way that they play as well. It's been so interesting to watch. Very unusual style of play, and Henderson's just had a fantastic season, and he's grown considerably from where he was this time a year ago. I think he's been such a reassuring presence at the back there, and I just think, all things considered, when you look at the clean sheet count, I think Pope might have one more clean sheet than
I think he does.
Off the top of my head. Yeah, I think he does. But I just think overall, Liverpool fans might say, well, Alisson, who's, I believe, kept the most clean sheets in a lot fewer games than those. So I think you have to look at the quality of defence in front of Alisson, and maybe that's a factor, and the fact that he's played a lot fewer games as well. But I just felt, all in all, Henderson was the goalkeeper for me, really.
It was for me too, actually. I know I could have gone with Pope, but I do think younger goalkeeper, really impressive in his first season, also very good with his feet. I mean, obviously, as a Burnley fan, I know Nick Pope's very good, but he's got a few years on Henderson, certainly, and his kicking leaves quite a bit to be desired. I think most Burnley fans could agree. Phenomenal goalkeeper still, and really happy to have him between the sticks. But Dean Henderson for me, remarkable character for someone so young, and a big future ahead for him, I think. Back four, 3 of the 4 are basically, a given, and everyone seems to have a different fourth choice in the centre-back position next to Van Dijk. You've gone with Basham.
Yeah, that was the hardest one. I did have a look at, in terms of the fullbacks, I did have a look at Pereira as well at Leicester, who I think's had a
very
fantastic
very
season.
Good season.
You just couldn't not pick the Liverpool pair, really, because again, for a side that has achieved what Liverpool have this season, the fullbacks have been absolutely fundamental to all of that. Van Dijk, as you said, picks himself, but the centre half, I know some people have picked Maguire. I just felt that, again, I had to look at Sheffield United, and people, they've used 3 centre halves, and as I've already mentioned, that the quite unique system that they play, and I just felt that when you look at someone like Basham, McConnell, people might have said, all 3 centre halves have been absolutely fantastic, but Basham, at the age that he is, I think he's in his early 30s, the experience that he's brought there. But I was reading up the statistics here. I've got it in front of me. He's made 61 tackles, winning 35 of them. He's also had 61 interceptions to his name, and has won back possession in the opposition's third on 7 occasions, the best record among all centre halves in the Premier League. And I think that I just think you could make a case maybe for any of those three centre-halves, but I just felt on what Sheffield United have done defensively this season, where they've come from to where they are right now, how fundamental that defence has been toward that. I just felt I had to pick one of those three, and he's just got the nod.
Well, Ian went with Maguire. I went with Johnny Evans because I think Johnny Evans in particular just seems to be. I thought he really elevated Maguire's game while he was at Leicester, and even with Soyuncu, it's like Maguire's never left in many ways at the moment. I feel like Johnny Evans is a real steady Eddie at the back, rarely makes a defensive mistake, always shows leadership, and yeah, I think that would be Matt. But again, that's a really hard one because, as you say, with Basham, you've read the statistics out, and you've got, you've highlighted how well Sheffield United have done, so you can't really argue with any of those. Midfield three, exactly the same as mine, and I think exactly the same as most. Henderson is the sort of auxiliary DM, De Bruyne and Grealish dovetailing. Yeah, I mean, the only question mark on that is whether you think Jack Grealish, being an idiot in the past few weeks, puts a blot on his sort of resume for that accolade to be in that team. But I don't think it does it? If we're looking at it from a footballing perspective, he's been phenomenal.
Yeah, I'll be honest that De Bruyne and Henderson were the easy two for me, and the third one, Grealish, was the one that I was a little bit unsure of. I thought about Maddison, who I think's had a good season, and has obviously been ahead of Grealish actually in terms of the pecking order for England, hasn't he? But I looked at, I think that Leicester are a much better side than Aston Villa in my opinion. And I think the level of influence that Grealish has had on that side is hard to ignore on what is arguably a poorer side. I think he's had a greater level of influence. He's scored more goals. He's got more. I think he's got twice as many. Is it twice as many assists? I think as Maddison. So I think all things considered, and I think the thing that Grealish has also done is that he's finally, proved that he is the level of player that people have always thought he might be. And I think that it's easy to underestimate how big a pressure that was on him coming into this season. The fact that there would have been doubts, as you said, can this guy cut it at the Premier? Can he be mature enough? And I think while he's had one or two misdemeanors off the pitch that you just alluded to, but I think that on the pitch, I think the level of maturity that he's shown this season has been impressive as well. So much so that we're led to believe that there are bigger, shall we say, Premier League clubs who are very keen to acquire him. So
absolutely,
that's a big factor.
Bit special mention to Kovacic as well, who I think's done a remarkable job at Chelsea this season. In terms of where he was last season, didn't really fit in. He's been arguably the most consistent midfielder in Frank Lampard's team. And just a quick word on De Bruyne before we go to the front three. He's the best player in the league, isn't he? Surely.
He's got to be right up there. I mean, I suppose with many people it would depend on who their persuasions lie with. I suppose people might say Van Dijk's the best player in the league. It depends what aspect of the football game that. It depends what part of the game that you appreciate the most. If you think defending is the most important part, then you pick him. So very difficult. But I think in terms of, I'm presuming that you're talking purely from a technical.
I was, from a technical standpoint.
A technical point of view. Yes, I would agree with that. I think that he's the best player in the league. Yeah.
Fair enough. Good. On the front three, two of the three we went with. I went with Vardy as well. I also went with Mane. I went with Salah over Aubameyang, but it was a really hard one because, Liverpool have been phenomenal. Aubameyang's done phenomenally well considering Arsenal have been pretty average this season, and that's been kind. Vardy has, I think. In many ways, I was surprised you put Vardy. He seems to be quite overlooked. I'm not sure why, because he's the top scorer in the division. But, he seems to get, I'm not going to say prejudice against, because, I don't know, maybe because he's not as fashionable as some of the other names, but there does seem to be a few overlooking Leicester's successes this season. I think he's been, right at the centre of them.
Yeah, and I think that, again, we talk about influence, and his influence on that side is there for all to see. They punched above their weight. I think it's arguable to say this season Leicester Rodgers has helped take them on to another level, and the way Vardy plays as well is so integral to how Leicester play. And I think, again, I mentioned earlier in this conversation about longevity, and for a player whose name you might argue isn't necessarily the most fashionable. You look at his history where he came from, non-league football. He's a wonderful story, Jamie Vardy. And he's taken that on and moved up the leagues. And then not only to get to the Premier League, which for someone who was playing, in non-league not that long ago, just to get to the Premier League would have been seen as an astonishing achievement. But to get into the Premier League, then go on and score to the level he has done on a regular basis, season after season after season, to win the Premier League. Jamie Vardy is an incredible story. You talk about off the pitch distractions as well. I mean, he's had one or two of those this season as well, which he's managed to come through as well, where maybe headlines have been made through none of his doing that might have distracted some people. But he's and as you say, he's the Premier League top scorer. So I think it's very difficult to ignore him. In terms of Aubameyang, and highlighted him and Salah, that was my quandary as well. Really, Mane was always going to be there because I think he's been Liverpool's most influential forward. But in terms of Salah and Aubameyang, I just look at Aubameyang's strike rate, which is fantastic. But I think, again, I use this word influence, and for me, Aubameyang's influence on that Arsenal, in what is, let's be honest, in terms of Arsenal, this is a very average Arsenal. I think that he has showed real maturity as well, which I think some people who saw him at Dortmund, which I did a lot, might have doubted whether he had that maturity in his game. That was very often a side of things that people doubted about him: his mentality, his commitment, his maturity. And I think the extra responsibility he's been given at Arsenal this season, he's really risen to that challenge and been a really important player for them, not just in terms of scoring goals, but also on the mentality of the side, which again has really come to the fore for me as well since Arteta took over as well. I really think Aubameyang is one of his real leaders on the pitch, and he'll hope to keep him so they can carry on doing that going forward. But they were the reasons really I went with those players.
No, yeah, I mean with Salah, I think the only thing is, again, really, really good numbers, part of a front three. I mean, Firmino's often integral to that, doesn't get the plaudits. This year, I actually think he's probably been one of his slightly lesser years in terms of how well he's done. I know he hasn't scored too many goals at Anfield, but Salah and Mane, phenomenal. Mane's got the plaudits, the recognition from I think the punters, but Salah again just doing his business quietly, chipping away, scoring important goals, delivering important assists, and I think that's that needs to be recognised. But again, your argument, Aubameyang, also very valid, because that Arsenal team is pretty. Well, it's all over the place really, and it's only really turned a corner since Arteta's come in. Just to finish all that off, I mean, it has to be Klopp, doesn't it, for the manager of the season? Although Ian Darke thought maybe Wilder deserved a shout, which I think is fair enough. But I even said, if as it seemed to go, he could have gone on to surpass the points record. He might not do now, depending on what they do with the season. But yeah, I mean, it is Klopp, isn't it? Really.
I agree really with. I agree totally that there has to be a mention for Wilder, what he's done there. And again, I talk about Vardy coming through the leagues. He's another example of that. It is possible to do that. I think sometimes the lower leagues and non-league, there's maybe a little bit of snobbery. Football snobbery comes in, and people sort of don't really give managers and players at that level the credit they deserve. But there's another example of someone who's learned his trade meticulously and come up through the divisions and backed himself. I love listening to him talk, because when he talks, you really get an understanding that this is a man who, surrounded by very different philosophies maybe that have come from abroad. He's always known what he wants to do clearly, and maybe some people would say it's in some ways very typical British values in terms of coaching. But he's been able to bring in other aspects to that, but also retain what he's very comfortable is him, and backed himself. And I love that when someone's so sure of themselves and is able to transfer that from a lower level up to a higher level. And I've just got so much admiration for him. But in terms of manager of the year, I mean, what Liverpool have done this season,
phenomenal.
I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And Klopp is when he first came to Liverpool, I remember saying to someone who didn't know a great deal about him, because obviously I'd watched him at Dortmund, I said, what Liverpool have got here is a team builder. And that's what Liverpool needed, because Liverpool were not able to just write checks like City were for 100 million or 50 million or whatever. They had to be a little cleverer than that. And I think that Klopp's been people will say, "Oh, look, he spent this on Van Dijk, he spent that on Allen." Yeah, he did, but you look at some of the other signings as well. Someone like Robertson, just for example, Wijnaldum, another example. And I think if you look through that Liverpool side, every single one of those players really has improved under Klopp, and that's the biggest compliment you can give him, really.
No, absolutely. And I think that summarises it perfectly. I mean, just a word on Chris Wilder. I think he's got the perfect balance, really, of an old school sort of mentality with that, with a tactical nous that you might not associate with sort of older managers, as you say, who've gone up from the lower leagues. But is there anything you'd say, in summary to this? To everything, I mean, yeah. No, I want to give you the final word, Adam. I'd like to give you the final word. This is end of the podcast. I'm going to shut up. You're going to sort of what's your hopes for the next few months amid this crisis? What are your hopes for everything going on? What do you want to see in the near future?
Well, I just hope that we can get back to playing football as safely as possible. That eventually, obviously, supporters are going to be able to get back watching the game at the stadiums, because without football supporters, it just isn't going to be the same. But I think to begin with, it's just got to be those small steps, and hopefully I think it will just raise the spirits of so many people. It's the national game after all, that if we could somehow find a way to, when it's right to do so, start to play football again. And I just hope, because you just realise when we haven't got it, you just realise, if we didn't know already, what a fundamental part it plays in all of our lives, and how much we need it back as soon as possible. But I just wish everybody good health, and hopefully some good football coming in the not too distant future. If we're able to do so, that'd be great.
Oh no, yeah, I think that was really well summarised. I'm glad I did that, because I'd have just sort of bumbled over something off the top of my head, and it wouldn't have been very pretty. But all I can say, is echo those good thoughts. Obviously, listen to the government guidelines, and don't drink bleach, because of course, if you drink bleach, that's a load of fake news and it's wrong. Okay, so we don't want to be doing any of that. Yeah, thank you. There we go. Most people do. I'm glad you did. Could have gone either way, but hopefully, just stay tuned on this podcast. It's a stay-at-home podcast. We bring interesting people on. We hope that you also agree with us. I think that was a really good chat, Adam. And we're gonna be keeping this going for quite a while. We've got lots of people lined up. James will probably be on next time with Peter Drury, I think. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And so thanks for that, Adam. That was good. I hope you all enjoyed
Absolute
that.
Pleasure.
And we'll see you next time. Also got some music playing in the background now. I'm not sure where that's come from, but see you later, everyone. Take care.